From BQE Restaurant and Lounge in the heart of Atlanta's historic Martin Luther King District, it's Newsmakers Live, bringing you the issues, politics, and perspective of the Atlanta community. Now in its 10th season, here is tonight's moderator and your host, 8-time Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, Mr. Maynard Eaton.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Phase 2 of our runoff series. This is our 10th season of Jim and I and his wife doing Newsmakers Live. During that time, we've interviewed a range of political thinkers, players, officials. But believe me, the man we're about to talk to next, to my mind, is the brightest, youngest political strategist in Atlanta. His name is Fred Hicks. He was once a young gun, now he's the thing. He's that guy.
Not so young anymore, right?
No, you're not so young anymore. But Fred, you've run a string of campaigns over your years, but just came up short this time being the captain of a campaign for mayor for Peter Amon.
Absolutely. It was a great run.
Great run?
I think so. You
didn't win. That's a great run.
Well, I mean, winning is the best outcome. But we finished fourth. He had the most votes out of any man in the election, including Senator Vincent Ford, City Council President Caesar Mitchell, and Councilman Kwanzaa Hall, and Fulton County Chairman John Eves. So for a newcomer to have the most votes out of any man is not bad.
Nobody knew him going in.
No one knew him. When I signed on with him, he was at 1.8%. And so it was
ended up with
11 point something. So I forget the exact final number on that.
Now you run other campaigns. Would you go through them, please? You've done so many. 2014, 15, 16. This wasn't your first rodeo.
No. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of folks. I see our DeKalb NAACP president over there, Ms. Teresa Hardy, and so I'm glad she's out here tonight. Done a lot of stuff in DeKalb. Last year we did Sherry Boston's race.
Yeah, Sherry Boston.
Against Robert James, where we unseated an incumbent. Here in Fulton, we've done Ted Jackson. Sheriff Jackson's one of mine. Last year, I've been fortunate to do a lot of infrastructure, water, transportation campaigns. So, really over the last few years, most of the big things that have happened in the metro region, I've had the privilege of being a part of it.
And because of your track record, because of your acumen, you didn't have to go with Peter Amon. That was your choice. You offered other races to run, right?
Yes, for sure. So I have great personal relationships with several other people who were several of the now former candidates for mayor. But there was something different, special, genuine, authentic about Peter that I really couldn't say no. Really couldn't say no to doing that race.
But it had to be a major decision for you. Atlanta has a track record of black mayors. You know that. You've worked for some of them. You've worked for black elected officials. You've helped put some of them in office or made a difference in their legislation, the water and all. Why go for a white guy?
So, I asked myself that same question for a long time. And, it took me about 6 months from the first sit down with Peter to decide to actually get engaged and to do that campaign. But over that time, I went from not knowing who he was to enjoying our conversations to deciding this is the person for whom I would vote if I had a vote in Atlanta. And then it was just a question of if this is someone for whom I would vote and I have the opportunity to work with them and to try to get them elected, why wouldn't I? And so that last part took a couple of months for me to really sort of work through that process because this is Atlanta. This is a black Mecca, right? Black mayors since 1973 for your brother by name, right, Maynard Jackson. And so it was a real struggle for me to decide if I want to be a part of this idea of handing the keys of the city over. But in the reality, I felt that Peter would have been an authentic and good caretaker of the legacy. And that's why we opened up our office on Auburn Avenue, right? That's why we spoke out. We were the first of all the campaigns to speak out after Charlottesville and call what happened in Charlottesville domestic terrorism and to call for the removal of the Confederate statues, not as a political stunt, but because that's what he genuinely believed in. And so to take his platform of being a white guy and understand that a lot of white people were not doing things, including Mary. They hesitated. It took him 2 or 3 or 4 days to make a statement about it. For him, it was just very clear. And so those kinds of things, just as short examples, along the way affirmed my decision.
I tell you what impressed me, seeing you with them, first of all. I knew, hey, I'm friends with him. But first of all, his opening day on Auburn Avenue says, first thing out of his mouth, race frames this election. And he stood by that.
Stood by it.
And it didn't seem like it was a scripted line he had you coached him on. So that's something he really believed. And that's true?
Absolutely. Absolutely true. You know, one of the interesting things in the over the last 6 days, people say, well, tell me the truth. Tell me what was he really like. I'm like, what you saw was what he really was and what he believed, right? We ran on the issues and on the topics in which he believed, not the ones about what that I coached him to talk on or talk about. And that he was at the vanguard of the discussions on race when you had other candidates. So truly, I mean, going back to this whole Charlottesville thing, right? You've had Rashad Ritchie on here a few times. Rashad's a good friend of both of ours. And, you know, he had both 2 of the other candidates, black male candidates, on air, and they both pulled up on calling it terrorism and calling for removal of the statues. And that was just amazing to me. And I know I'm on the opposite side of Ambassador Young with this, but symbols are symbols, and because they are symbols, that inherently they mean something. And so for my candidate, who happened to be a white guy from Buckhead, where people, by the way, when we talked about it, people were like, ooh, don't do it. You're going to lose votes in Buckhead if you do it. There was something that was not captured on TV, but his wife is Jewish, and they said, when we were sitting down talking about it, she said that, you know, if someone had spoken up and spoken out, we wouldn't have had the Holocaust. And as an interfaith family, we cannot, even if it costs us this election, we cannot sit down and not use our platform to speak out against this. And so the other black folks in the room, we all looked at each other, we're like, man, we really made the right decision, you know, and so it was just a...
But did you catch hell for that from your colleagues, your friends?
Not until we caught fire.
Did people question whether or not you were working just for the dollar?
At first, I think people assumed it was just about money, right? Oh, it's the rich guy from Buckhead. But people didn't give me a hard time until we became a serious threat, right? At the end of August, when we showed up tied for second with Keisha Lance Bottoms. And then I started getting texts from people. It's like, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing? This isn't supposed to happen. I was fine when he was at 1.8%. But you're actually trying to win this thing? Well, what are you doing? What are you doing? So that's when it got a little interesting.
And you really thought, and still believe, he could have won this thing, huh?
I believe he should have won this thing. And I mean,
should have won.
Yeah, you know, I mean, in terms of, if you have someone who has the right ideas, who's in it for the right reasons, and who's willing to represent the entire city, not because they feel it's their time, but because they want to serve the city, you know, you in my mind, we had the best candidate out there, and, you know, unfortunately voters didn't agree, but it was... I'll put it to you like this. One of the goals that Peter and I had at the beginning of the campaign was to say that we were going to run the best campaign out of any candidate. And if, at the end of the day, people said to themselves, I know he's the best candidate, but I just can't vote for a white guy, then that would be okay. And he said, I can live with that if that's what it comes down to. So when he and I spoke today, and there are always some things you look back and you think, oh, maybe we should have done this, we should have done that. But at the end of the day, I do believe that we ran the best campaign out of all the 13 candidates out there. And I believe that if people did not vote for him, it was just because you couldn't argue with his ideas. You couldn't argue with his passion. I mean, you couldn't argue with I think a lot of things that we were trying to do. And if the city just wasn't ready for it, then that's okay, because that's something we can't control.
Was Peter a reflection of you? Did you have to coach him up, or did you just have to manage him?
Well, he'd never run for office before, right? And so there are certain things that if you run for office that you some certain skills that you sort of pick up along the way, right? And he didn't have those. He didn't have those, but
look at the smile.
Well, he was genuine. He was authentic. I was talking to someone today, and you know, Peter comes from a corporate background, and so for him, if he walk into a restaurant like this, he's like, oh no. Fred, I can't bother them. They're eating. That would be rude. I'm like, Peter, you're running for mayor. They expect you to talk. No. That's rude. I'm not going to interrupt their meal to talk to them. And so things like that were fun-ish.
Because polite doesn't go with politics, does it?
Polite does not go with politics. You better get that vote. You better go get it. Say, excuse me, I know you're eating that chicken, but just real quick, my name is Peter Amen. Now, by the end, he was at Piccadilly at Greenbrier, and he was at other places like Busy Bee, the White House up in Buckhead, and he'd gotten fairly okay with it. But I tell you, that was one of the hardest things to get him to do the things that people expect politicians to do. He just wasn't comfortable with it.
But also, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it new for you running a major mayoral campaign?
No, so I've been involved, like I mentioned, in several high-profile races that had a direct impact on the lives of people. So whether it was 2014 in Clayton County, Clayton County, I'm a graduate of Clayton State. Clayton County is very special to me. And when you have people who were walking miles just to get to the grocery store, or a mile or two just to get to the grocery store, and having to walk back another mile or two, to be in charge of that campaign to bring mass transit to Clayton County, that was really significant in the day-to-day lives of people. Or to do the MARTA expansion campaign that we did last year, that if the money flows as it should, will allow us to have east-west connectivity, right, from the AUC connecting things over to Emory. And you start talking about off-peak hours and things like that. So races that where we had a lot at stake, that were a lot at stake, not in terms of like contracts, but in terms of making a difference in lives every day, those sort of things are very important to me. And then, of course, in terms of high profile, I would argue that the DA race, because of what happened with Burl Ellis and all of that, that was, I tell anyone this, that Sherry Boston's race last year was, and then immediately followed up by the runoff between Ted Jackson and Richard Langford, which was really, really aggressive and ugly. Those two things are the best out of all the campaigns I've worked with. They were the best preparation for what we were trying to do here, right, in terms of the spotlight, the media attention, the expectations, the concerns, and the stress level.
So you were ready. You had learned the ins and outs.
Well, I wouldn't say I was ready. I mean, I thought I was ready. But when you go into a race up into a qualifying, you had 17 different candidates out there, and then 13 people qualified. I mean, you're talking about, again, some heavy hitters. You have the sitting city council president. You have the sitting, or he had to resign, but Sheriff Fulton County. You're dealing with, Mary Norwood, who'd been in office for so long, and you had Kathy Willard, who was the city council president on city council, ran for Congress. I mean, no one had a playbook, except for maybe if you worked on one of the Republican presidential campaigns last year, where you had like 17 people, but none of us had a playbook for this kind of election.
This was new territory for everybody, huh?
Oh, absolutely. And it was fun at times, at times.
You don't have a gray hair yet.
Oh, no. I invest in Just for Men. Please buy it, because we need the stocks. I use a lot of it.
You told me, I grew exponentially. But you've done some other major races. This one was different?
It was. In Peter's case, at one point, I want to say between our phone bankers and canvassers, we probably had about more than 70, probably I think 82 at one point, people who were in some way, shape, or form on our payroll. And at the end of the day, we raised a little bit more than $2 million, right? So it was a massive campaign with two different campaign offices. We started phone banking in June, and so it was a massive operation, much larger than one than any campaign I've had in the past.
What is it you do as a campaign manager, and how did you learn how to do it? I mean, there's no school or class for this, is there?
There are some programs there are some schools that offer degrees in campaign management.
Really?
I went to Florida State for grad school, and we now offer a program in campaign management. So I use a lot of interns from my program at FSU. There are a few other schools that offer a degree in that.
And that's what you study there?
No. So my bachelor's is in international management. My master's is in international affairs and demography, right? So I'm a numbers guy, and all my doc work, I never finished the dissertation, so not Dr. Hicks, but I was in the second phase of it, but it was in program evaluation, testing, measurement, and analysis. So again, I'm a data guy. I worked for FEMA and then for a couple other programs, and decided to take the modeling that I did for our FEMA-funded programs in Florida and applied in a political context. So that's how I got into this.
Is this something you grew into wanting to do, or something you had a niche for and a knack for and a love for early on?
Oh, I've always loved politics. You know, my mom was active duty Army. My dad was more of the stay-at-home person, so my dad was very, very political. He was the first black president of our local Lions Club chapter.
Wow, okay.
And so, in sixth grade, I organized for our little school a mock election. That was the '88 Bush-Dukakis election. I organized a little mock one there. In '94 in Alaska in high school, I ran phone banks for Tony Knowles, who I believe was still our last Democratic governor of Alaska. I was student body president in college. Volunteered on the Gore campaign in Tennessee in 2000. So this is something it's always been sort of like a hobby. But about 12 years ago, in 2006, I decided to, leave what I was doing and pursue this as an active career. And there wasn't really a playbook for it, not the way that I believe in doing, which is data-driven. You have PR people who do things, but from a data angle, that was...
And that's your specialty, the data stuff?
Absolutely.
So what is it you actually do? You just sit in the office and talk about, here's how you tell people what to do?
Sit there with a pipe, look at maps, and think about, I wonder. No. The way I do campaigns.
This ain't easy, man, is it?
No. It's you're part psychologist, right? You're part data person. You're part, therapist, right? It's an emotional experience. Let me tell you, most of the people who run for office are highly successful in their individual non-political careers, right? They're partners at major firms, they are CEOs, CFOs, they're solicitor generals of the county or whatever. But running for office is an entirely different beast. And when they run for office, it's an area, you take someone who's highly accomplished and very competent, very bright, and put them as a grown person into an area where they make them turn into a neophyte, it creates some insecurities. And so working with them and that. So, for the way that I do it is we do everything from the campaign plan to the messaging. I spend a lot of time with messaging, the targeting.
Yeah, I know.
And, as you know, I'm very particular about the messaging that goes out. And we build a team, hire, fire. I mean, just the whole thing. I mean, it's a campaign is a full-fledged organization that has a shelf life, right? Because one way or the other, everyone's campaign ends on election day, right? You have some wrap up, but everyone's campaign ends on election day.
And how big an operation was this?
So Peters, I think we're still crunching the final numbers. It was 2.1 million, something like that. And again, 70, 80 people on payroll at some point. Yeah. So again, if you count our phone bankers and our canvassers, in addition to our core team, and those are just people on payroll. We had a women's group, Women for Peter Amen. And we had about 120 members of that. I mean, everyone from M. Tamanika Youngblood here in the Sweet Auburn Works to Ann Kramer and Ann Curry, who are two leading nonprofit folks in the nonprofit consulting space, to Virginia Hefner, who ran Woodruff, just retired earlier this year, to Leslie Ward, to people like Christy Offit. I mean, it was really amazing. And when I really reflect on it, to me, and what I said to Peter and to particularly our women's group is that the hardest thing for me is that we weren't successful for the people who put themselves out there for us. But
and a lot of people did put themselves out there for us.
They really did, and I think that was a testament to where we are in this city, right? That people. They always tell you that substance and qualifications in politics are usually a bad mix, right? You want the person who has more sizzle than substance, and Peter is definitely a substantive person, but to see that people rallied around a substantive candidate was really, 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 really amazing. And really for us, I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing that I heard on the trail was, I like Peter, I want to vote for him, but I don't believe he can win. And so, most of the other campaigns with which I've been involved, the challenge has been selling people on the notion, selling people on the candidate. That part, once people met him, they liked him. They wanted to support him. The challenge was convincing people that in Atlanta, that a white male from Buckhead could win an election to represent the city. And ultimately, I just didn't do a good enough job to get convincing people that he could win. But it wasn't about the ideas. People liked him. People liked what we were talking about. It's just that they didn't believe he could win, and people did not want to waste their vote.
How's he feeling about this now? Does he see a future as an elected official? And did he think it was a quixotic sort of trip that he never knew he could make?
Yeah, he. I mean, like anyone who doesn't emerge victorious, you have you're sad and you reflect a lot. But and he really, really wanted to win this. He knew the challenges going into it. But we spoke again last night. He talked to a few other people. When we really look at the numbers and look at what happened on Election Day, up and down the ballot, I think he and I are fairly convinced that we optimized our performance, that we landed where we were. I mean, we have. At the Fulton County chair, you have, Keisha Waits, who's a candidate there. You have the top 3 vote getters in the mayor's race were women. You have Felicia Moore, who emerged when you had two other men on the ballot, including C.T. Martin. And yes, Felicia Moore is in the runoff there. You look over in District 6, where you had Kirk Rich, who everyone thought was going to win that. But Jennifer Ide slid in there and won outright. And so kind of up and down the ballot, with the exception of downtown here with Amir Faroqi, women had a great day.
So you're the woman, huh?
Absolutely. And, I think the seeds for this election were planted last year when Trump won. And then when you look at, and Peter and I were talking about this, when you look back at it, no one in Atlanta thought that, or very few people in Atlanta thought that Hillary wasn't going to win. And so when she didn't win, there was like, wow, shock. And then you saw the things that Trump and the Republicans were talking about doing. And if you look at the Women's March, you had, I think, I read somewhere like 20,000 women from Atlanta went up to D.C. for that march, right? And when they came back, they were at Manuel's Tavern. They were at the Fulton County Democratic Party meeting. I mean, you had attendance like we've never seen before. And so the seeds for this election, I believe, were planted then. And so, it was one of those things where, we can't control that. We recognized it, and that was one of the reasons why we started our women's group, and it had great numbers to try to account for, because we saw it in the data, we saw it in the movement, we saw it in the conversations early on, but that simply wasn't something that we could control. And, we jokingly say, he and I are both, progressive, and any other year, we'd be really excited about it. Just did it have to happen this year when he's on the ballot? Happened in 2018, happened in 2016, but 2017 could have, maybe kind of pushed back. But that being said, again, I think that we finished as high as we were going to finish.
But you talk about women, and you mentioned we have Keisha Lance Bottoms for mayor, Keisha Waits for the Fulton County chair. We talked about then what happened prior to the runoff election. To women, black and white, will this be racially motivated with regard, or will it be gender motivated?
Well, you have 2 women, that negates the whole gender issue in this runoff. I think that by and large, you are going to see people fall along racial lines. Then we started seeing a little bit of that towards the end of the regular election. You'll have some crossover. Buckhead will certainly be motivated. Southwest will certainly be motivated. And so I think it's a matter of, who can get a few more votes on the other side, or who can get out their vote. I have every confidence in the world that Keisha Lance Bottoms will be able to get the majority of the people who voted last week back out to the polls. And I also believe that Buckhead is fairly motivated. So, I expect this to be a very hotly contested one. It's been quiet for the last 6 days, but it's not going to be like that for long.
It's going to get ugly. Don't you think it's going to get ugly?
I think it can be very ugly. I mean, these are 2 people who don't really like each other anyway. And now that the stakes are high, and you can see, when you have 12 other opponents, which each one of the candidates had, and probably 6 or 7 other significant opponents out of that 12, it's really hard to zero in on one person. And you always have to make a calculation with a finite number of days and a finite amount of money, who am I going to go after, right? But when it's just straight up you and one other person, now those opposition research books come into play, right? Now your resources and every light and everything is focused solely on that opponent. And I'm pretty sure both of them have books on the others, and so it'll be interesting.
Well, you know they do.
Yeah, for sure.
Who will Peter likely endorse, if anybody?
I can't speak for Peter on this one. This was it was a very, he invested personally, financially, a significant amount of himself into this. And so, I don't know what he will do. I know he's spoken with both Keisha and Mary. But where he's ultimately going to land, I don't know at this stage.
Will Mayor Kasim Reed help or hurt her? He seems like he's beat up a few of the other. It seems like he did beat up. I mean,
us too. He went after us too.
Oh yeah, sure did. So I mean, is that help? How does he become contrite now?
Well, Mayor Reed's numbers are very interesting, right? If you ask people about the direction of the city, you'll get 68, 70, 72% of people will say, yeah, I like it's that job approval rating. If you ask people, even in a crowded field, for whom would you vote? And he's a candidate there. And we looked at this, we tested this. He still won. I mean, he would have won outright without an election.
Really?
Without a runoff, yeah. But then
in this field.
In this field. But then when you ask the question, do you like him? That's where the numbers get a little iffy, right? And so he has a saying that I really like, that the future of politics is performance. And so for people people don't like his style, he rubs a lot of people the wrong way. But if you were here in 2009, when you had people being killed on the side, just cutting their grass like we had in Kirkwood, or everything in Atlanta was affordable because we had the highest, foreclosure rate in the country. You had brownouts. City Hall was closed on Fridays because you couldn't afford to keep the lights on. And Peter talks about this all the time. When they got into City Hall in January of 2010, the city only had $7 million and about $20 million in bills. So really, government was at a negative $13 million. And so, our value proposition on what we put out there, and the mayor, even when he went after Peter, didn't dispute this, and this is where Peter is really strong, is that you took a city that was broke. Right, I mean, it broke due to the recession. No blaming Mayor Franklin or anything like that. But you had to make really, really tough decisions. And he did that. I mean, and there are all kinds of quotes. The mayor gave him credit in 2010 and 2011 for turning the city around, absolutely turning the city around financially. And now you have the $170 million or whatever. But the decisions they had to make. How do we get 4 people on a fire truck, which impacts your insurance rates? How do we reopen the swimming pools and the rec centers? How do we get the At Promise Youth Center going? What do we do about the west side? All those things. That was just a very, very serious thing. And so people who were here in 2009, they remember that. And I think that people appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons why
he's turned the city around now.
Right. But now where we are in 2017 going forward is the city's good. A lot of people have some money in their pocket. Not everybody. And so we have the quote unquote, I won't say the word. We're dealing with different issues now. And so while I think Kasim Reed was probably the perfect person
we're dealing with the issue of whether or not black folks can stay in this city. That's the issue.
Well, black folks, white folks, young folks, period. I mean, this is a very expensive city, and it happened like that. I mean, we went from leading the city, leading the country, I think 5 straight quarters and foreclosures. I mean, places in Castleberry Hill that are now $300,000, $400,000 or $500,000 condos, we're going for 70, 80 in 2010 and 2011, right? And so and I think that's part of the challenge is that Atlanta changed so quickly. Right, it became the hot thing, right? So the movie industry is here,
right,
and everyone wants to be here again, and it just happens so rapidly. But that being said, back to your question, I think that Keisha and Mayor Reed are 2 different people. Obviously, he's endorsing her, he's supporting her. I'm sure he will play a role in this runoff.
A role.
He will have a lot to say. And I think it would be really interesting to see how people respond to him.
Some people think, right or wrong, that she's just a puppet for him, that he's really running the show, and she's just a face on this election.
I don't think that's the case.
You don't think that's the case?
I don't at all. You know, she stands on her own 2 feet. I've known her for a long time. Our kids went to school together and things of that nature. So we've known each other for a long time. Singing at basketball games, our boys. One of her sons is a year behind mine, and all of that. And so, you know, she definitely is her own person and has her own thoughts and her own ideas. And the other thing is that, I think that will emerge in this runoff, right?
That's what somebody said. She'll have to show herself really now.
Absolutely. And so, and I think she will. I mean, and you know, she's very, very bright, and a solid thinker. And I'll tell you, during the debates, I was really actually impressed. And I told Peter this. We both talked about it. You know, any attack that was levied against her, she managed to parry it, turn it around, and handle it very, very well.
Definitely, very deftly.
Absolutely. I said it before about the WSB debate, right, with the tax lane thing. And I was like, the force is very strong with this one. So I was like, Peter, I think we'll leave her alone because she can handle it really well. Better than probably any of the other.
Fred, have you been asked to go to work for her campaign?
So I've had conversations, with a lot of people about a lot of things. Now I'm sounding like a politician, right? You know what? After the election last week, I just felt like I didn't want to be involved with anything in the runoff. I mean, it's exhausting, right? It was tired in my soul. It felt like when you manage a campaign versus consulting a campaign, you put everything in it. And when you're the campaign manager, you're an extension of the candidate, especially when that candidate is a first-time candidate. And so you feel everything they feel, as well as everything that your team feels, right? And so it's a very, very emotional thing. Election night, I slept for about 3.5 hours. But when I woke up, I thought I'd slept for 10 hours. I thought I'd overslept and I missed the stuff I had to do. But that's how exhausted it was in that one, right? And so for the runoff, we'll see. We'll see.
Have you decided who you would support on election day? Yes, you have.
Of course I have.
And?
I mean, we'll have to see. You
sure you're not running for office?
But no, I think that we'll announce. I mean, there are a lot of very serious things at stake here. We are really talking about billions of dollars, the complete rezoning of the city. You're talking about the ability to protect and grow a middle class. You're talking about the ability to protect and grow a middle class, or to keep the separation that we have right now with the shrinking middle class, and where people have it, they're doing better, and people who don't, they're doing worse. So, this is, and I think that the candidate who's best able to express an understanding and appreciation for that will win this thing regardless of race. But it's got to be about what's happening.
Regardless of race.
Regardless.
There are many people who suggest, I'm going to end it on this note, that we're ushering in a new era, a new day for Atlanta.
A new day. That was our slogan in DeKalb County. Go ahead.
Do you think that is so here? This is a different Atlanta than we've seen heretofore.
Oh, absolutely. You had over 30,000 people register to vote after Trump won last year in the city. We had 92,000 people vote this year. That was a number that exceeded everyone's expectations. And so, we're in a different place as a city.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fred Hicks, the premier campaign strategist and campaign manager in Atlanta. Now, thank you for joining us on Newsmakers Live. Now my partner and friend, Mr. Jim Welcome.
All right. Thank you for coming out tonight, everyone. We've had a very exciting evening tonight. We have touched some uncharted ground. I'd like to thank Fred for coming. And as usual, this has been Newsmakers. Brother Rizzi, take it over.